creativity nearly killed me. I was just so tired and overworked. So I started going to see a therapist for cognitive behavioural therapy. And this therapist started saying, if you want to do a pie chart, how much of that would be your work? How much would be your rest? How much would be your play? And I quite proudly said 95% work. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't work like that in normal life. You need to rebalance it. But I somehow worked out that to calm my mind, mindfulness might be a good way to do it.
Executive Creative Director of New Studio, world-class agency, branding, 6 books, 1 on the way, TEDx speaker, podcast host, founder of Lux Coffee Company. So that's a lot of things that you do. Radim, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure, especially talking to someone who's now currently having more daylight than I do. So hello to Mexico.
Well, I mean, you do a lot of things, but the thing that I'm really most interested in speaking to you about today is this whole area of mindfulness and creativity and how to kind of perform as a creative. And that just so happens to be the title of your most recent book, Mindful Creative.
That's correct. Yeah. It's interesting topic, mindfulness, because it's one of these areas of life that has been, the mindfulness techniques have been as old as 3,000 years. And we somehow now been sort of enlightened more in a sort of wider spectrum of society to actually think, there's a way to keep ourselves a little bit more sane, because I think with the awareness of mindfulness and mindfulness technique and kind of like how we can help ourselves in a busy mind, it comes with the time where we become busier than ever before. Because I use this quote by a comedian called Des Bishop, who says, 20 years ago, we were all mindful. We were practicing mindfulness half a day, every day, because you know why? Because we don't have phones in our pockets. We don't have internet. We were on a bus, we were watching condensation going down, and you were waiting for a bus. You had nothing else to do, so you were kind of in your head, and our minds were sort of less busy. Of course, there were people with busy lives and we were doing sort of complicated things that sort of can unearth us and kind of give us a bit more stress. But we started talking about mental health and emotional intelligence, and we're talking about mindfulness a lot more, but we are also getting a lot more busier than we have done ever before. Our to-do lists are a lot more busier than ever before. And I think it's just kind of like we have it in the right time, but it's also very necessary to be aware of the fact that, whoever you speak to now, from 15-year-olds to 50-year-olds, sort of veterans, like everyone's overwhelmed. And that's just a product of our sort of architecture right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. We did all used to be mindfulness, and it does seem like a very long time ago. But there's this kind of stereotype of artists, especially musicians. We need to suffer to create our art. Do you think we need to suffer to achieve our goals as creatives?
I think, no, I don't want to disagree. I think the longer I'm in the creative world, I feel the point of suffering would kind of make the work a little bit more uncomfortable, because if you're trying to get some sort of expression of your soul out there, ultimately creativity is a bit like a sport. It's an exercise. You kind of hope that the creativity come and meet you halfway, whatever the journey is you take into it. But you look at people like Max Martin, who is basically a musical mathematician. Creates the biggest songs on the planet. It's not accident. He doesn't suffer for his art or for the productions. So I believe creative conflict is a necessary part of what we do, because it can't be easy. Creativity can be easy, but I don't think that the element of like, it should be really hard because, that's the only way to achieve things. I think that's maybe a bit of a myth of the past, because, ultimately the longer you do what you do, it will become easier, and I think some people say, I think it was Damien Rice who said, okay, I wrote this amazing album about a breakup and now I'm in a happy place. I'm not going to write anything. That's just a personal expression. Like basically the story sometimes is in the waiting, but for the stuff that you and I do and lots of other people potentially listening to this, we do commercial creativity. And that's usually part of a mathematical equation. This question needs this answer for it to work as an outcome, so it's plus and plus equals to plus. So yeah, I think suffering, what we do in terms of a creative expression, is I think unnecessary. But what we do as creative professionals and as humans, we don't always think about it from a perspective, let's say, of an athlete, that, we hypothetically put our trainers on and go and start running 5 or 10K without any preparations, any stretches, any nutrition, and then get surprised that, we've come back from a 10K run, which we didn't finish, and we are absolutely knackered and hurting and unable to do any running for the next month. I think sometimes that sort of sheer excitement of doing the creative work can be negative.
There's a reason I asked that question. It's because like I've read the first couple of chapters of your book, and you do mention that like there was a period where you were just working like a hell of a lot, like maybe 12 hour or longer a day, and you put a statement in there that like, you worked the equivalent of 30 years in only 20 years. You were working kind of double. So like how did you keep going? How did you keep that drive and that purpose, or like did you even have it at that time?
Well, I'm clearly must have done, because you don't do that by accident. But the way I kind of came up to that conclusion is because I used to work almost 2 days in one day. I would at first I would work in a company. I was a sort of an employee of a sort of running a mail design agency, nothing spectacular, but I was building my own business in the background at night. And that stuff was exciting. All of a sudden I had the autonomy, I had a sort of expression. I could do whatever I wanted to do, and kind of like someone showed me that there's a potential of something that it could potentially work. So that keeps you awake, like I'm thinking there's a future. I didn't even know that I was actually creating a really strong launch pad for starting on my own, because I was employed, the pay was shite, and I'm thinking this can't potentially go on forever. And you feel a bit constrained. So I worked endless hours, to the point when you read in somewhere, I think in that chapter, like I remember waking up on my 27th birthday or something like that, and I slept for like 4 hours or 5 hours for a very long time. Like every night was a long one, and it was my birthday, and I was like, my girlfriend at the time gave me it was a cake and happy birthday, and I was like so broken. I cried in that chocolate cake. I was like, I can't do this anymore. But I slept in a day. I reset it, and I just carried on for years and years doing the same thing. Even when I've set up on my own, I wasn't disciplined. I wasn't regulated. I was like, I've got jobs coming in. There's people like more people asking you to do stuff. Okay, well, I'm doing it for myself. I'm an immigrant in a different country. I don't have a financial safety like somebody else. I don't have the network of friends and family. I'm gonna carry on and do and do and do and do. When you do, it kind of eventually becomes successful, that you don't have to go back to your old job. So you can leave that job behind, but you still work the hours. And then when you grow it a bit more, I mean, when I say it, I mean a business. I remember doing the admin stuff just in a day. So I would wake up at 10 o'clock in the morning, do my meetings. I used to live in central London. I'd do my meetings, do the stuff, just, I didn't even go to the gym. I was like, this is all work. This is all exciting. Would normally fall asleep around Deal or No Deal, if you remember. It was like 4 o'clock. That was my sort of nap time. And then I would make a dinner, and I would work till about 4 o'clock in the morning, because I was working across different time zones, across different campaigns. It was fascinating. It was addictive, because it all goes back to survival instinct. This is the scarcity mindset that haunts every freelancer. It's like, will I ever work again? Like, I need to take this job. I need to pay for this. And I didn't have I had not defined my enough at any point at that time, because I was just kind of pushing that finishing line further and further and further and further, because that even wasn't one. Hence why I've ended up doing, so many hours, but so happily, even as broken as I was really happy.
That's interesting because reading it, like I assumed that this was quite a dark time in your life, but you were just loving what you were doing.
Absolutely. I was totally in love, because I was doing what I was, it was kind of an amazing cocktail of work, because I was doing campaigns that I was, celebrated for. I was earning good money. There was lots of publicity. We used to have all of the magazines like Computer Arts and Digital Arts and Advanced Photoshop. And it was like, it was an emerging scene of that wasn't emerging digital illustration, but it was the sort of renaissance of digital illustration. And I remember sort of adding the extra titles to my name. It was like I was an art director, graphic designer, illustrator. I remember how poetic I felt, like, oh, I'm an illustrator now. And you sign up with different agents in different countries, and they actually get you work. So you get to do things like you've never done before. And that newness is almost like if you've ever done drugs, and they never taste as good as they did for the first time, when you first MDMA, it's like, this is amazing. And then it goes like, this is diminishing returns, like it doesn't taste as good ever again. And I think having done so many weird and different and sort of exciting projects, there was always something new. There was always something new, and you're in demand, and you lose focus of, am I making myself ill? Am I doing this right? Because I remember how I was totally like excited about what I was doing, but I could see the signs slowly creeping in that my body was saying, dude, we're not gonna do this for too long, like this is not quite right. And I remember going to the tube. I remember going to catch a tube, and I just felt like, when you've got like sometimes this sort of like a glitch on a computer screen, like something just got. And I remember going, I don't know, I'm sure I was smoking and trying to catch a bus and go to the tube. It was like, the first felt like a glitch. Like, this felt really strange. This didn't feel quite right. But I was, it's still sort of my late 20s, early 30s. You can kind of walk it off, like, oh, I'll be fine, because I've got so many things to do. I've got so many people to see. And bless her, my wife now, then my girlfriend, when we moved in together, she was like, she could see me how I was working. She was like, did you ever think about taking a day off? And I'm like, I went ballistic. I'm like, I do meetings one day a week. And it's like, that's still work. Well, I do emails, like, that's still work. Like, to me, like, work was just like Photoshop, doing this, and anything else wasn't work. I thought like this was just, it just doesn't count. She was like, yeah, all of it count. Like, all of it's work, to the point where I worked so hard, worked so much that I couldn't. One day, I just woke up, was going to the post office, and I thought I was going to die crossing the street. Literally, I was so broken, like dehydrated. I tried to balance things with a good diet, but I was just overworked, like, because it's like, imagine being a heroin addict and being sort of supplied with constant supply of like the drug that you need, because I was working, I was busy. Is any of the work still present from what I created back then? Of course not. So I wasn't creating some masterpieces then, it would be like amazing type of work that we need to keep, but it's easy to derail your life and your work that way, because it's, yeah, I had, it was undefined. It was literally undefined. I could work from when we moved in together from 6 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock in the evening, excitingly.
So it's amazing. Like, yeah, I mean, it's the start of the year as we were talking about this. So I was going to ask, kind of, did you set a goal? Was it like, what was driving you towards this? But it was kind of this drug and excitement of just doing the work you loved.
It's the scarcity mindset. I mean, we've got survival instinct. When you see, for example, animals, like how they eat, they eat everything at once because they think that nothing else is going to come. And I think that's the problem as humans and creatives, that we think that we need to say yes to everything. And that's what I did.
Even though you were happy and you're doing great work, you did reach a kind of point, a crisis point. Like, is this when you started to live more mindfully? Where did this inspiration from this book come in?
The book is very much written from this experience. Yeah, because as you know, the first chapter starts with the words, creativity nearly killed me. And I felt very liberated when I wrote it down, because it was like, that's exactly what nearly happened. So I happened to take a psychology class at uni. And as a part of it, we learned how to do a relaxation exercise, which technically is a meditation exercise. It was a box breathing, kind of like a body scan. And I think when I was 17 or 18 when I learned it. And I'm like, what is this thing about? I'm a teenager, just like busy living on life. It was the 90s and everything was amazing. It's like, why will I ever need a meditation? Like, what is this thing about? Obviously, fast forward 12, 13 years in my early 30s. And I was like, okay, like, how do I get myself out of this? Because what happens in that world, what I've created for myself unknowingly and potentially, unconsciously in a way, was the fact that I got myself in a hole, and I felt like I was the only person going through such hard times in the world. Like, I felt very lonely. I was, luckily in a very loving relationship, a very supportive relationship, but I felt like, okay, I want to live a normal life. And I couldn't really sort of join the dots why it was happening. It was like, I felt so exhausted that, you'd be doing washing up and start crying. It was like, what is going on? Like, this isn't quite right. Like, I was just so like tired and overworked. So I started going to see a therapist for cognitive behavioral therapy because some of my childhood anxieties and sort of fears and stuff sort of got really amplified through, this very fragile state. And this therapist started saying, if you were to do a pie chart, how much of that would be your work? How much would be your rest? How much would be your play? And I quite proudly said, 95% work. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't work like that in normal life. Like you need to rebalance it. And I remember like the feeling of burnout was physical. I remember like that glitch that I mentioned that started, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 years earlier. I felt physically uncomfortable just walking down the street. I felt physically like I was worried. I was like having mini panic attacks. And I traced it back to lots of now I've deciphered it. There was a lot of like, I was dehydrated, I was over caffeinated, I didn't take the right supplements, no lack of vitamin D. Like it was all physical as well as in my mind. But I somehow worked out that to calm my mind, mindfulness might be a good way to do it. And I by accident stumbled on a video by Mike Williams doing a talk for the School of Life, which is run by Alain de Botton, and they talk about mindfulness. And there were almost like as if someone opened this door with a light, in it and said, you know what? If you start thinking differently about your life, there might be a good chance that you can fix it. Because at that time, I was very much living in a world which was populated by numbers, pictures, like Behance numbers and followers and Twitter followers. And we had this new, and I'm going to call it almost like a source of evil that sort of derailed us, most of us, that we didn't know how to even deal or operate with social media. All of a sudden, people had more likes, people had more followers, people had more, folio pieces on online. And you're like, am I enough? Am I doing this enough? Am I like, you start sort of questioning your sense of identity. And all of that sort of was the cocktail that derailed me, thinking, am I doing this right? Was it? So being able to sort of start thinking that there's a time I can set aside and sort of calm my mind and actually work on just understanding what's happening. It was a long, long process because let's say, took me 10 plus years to break myself. And it's been taking me, a good chunk of years to actually fix myself, because what people think about sort of mindfulness or meditation, that's sort of, it's like a pill, you just do like, okay, I'm going to sit down, close my eyes, take 5 breaths and life will be better. It's not a plaster. It's not a pill, it's a lot of work. And, when you think about it from the sports perspective, like if you break yourself, you cause yourself a real damage, you're a sideline as a footballer for 6 weeks, 6 months, like if you do something really badly to yourself, it takes time to heal. And that's absolutely the same applies to our minds. Like if you really break it, it will take time to heal it.
How long have you been? So this was kind of the start of the journey, and then you've recently wrote the book, kind of putting all your experiences together. Like, what kind of time period are we talking about here?
So I think we're talking about the burnout was like 12 years ago now. It was 12 years. And I have slowly taken some of the ideology of mindfulness and worked it into my creative process. And I was lucky that I was beginning to be asked to do talks on the stage about work. And I was kind of observing the pattern of the portfolio talk that, is still prevalent on some of the stages. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I just want to talk about like how I work, because the whole idea of creativity, as we talked about at the beginning, is like, it's not meant to be easy, but it's not meant to be impossible. We sometimes can suffer for our art, but most of the creative process is full of suffering, because the people inside the process are not always aligned. They don't always see eye to eye. They're not always the cleanest slates to actually collaborate perfectly. Because if you're broken, if you burn out, you're going to take things very personally. If you're carrying your childhood traumas unresolved, you're going to be different around people. You're not going to be the most functioning human being in the room. So I was always under the sort of conviction that creativity should be enjoyable. Like as a someone who was in the bands before, you fight with people and kind of you try to be a dominant voice, because at the beginning of our careers we are very selfish. We are very self-obsessed about like I think I know best. This is the reason why I've opened for a show. This is the reason why I bought a guitar. This is the reason why I started playing drums, because you think you know better, and you slowly start sort of letting go as we go older, and just as things make more sense. So being asked to do talks on creativity, I was trying to find like, what is the way that we can actually enjoy collaboration more, how we can find more peace in our work, how we can actually understand who we are as a human being that brings ourselves to that creative process, and what does it mean? Because when we are in that self-obsessed stage, we find fault with everything and everyone. Like, so we're doing nothing wrong, and everybody else's problem. So looking at ways of how mindfulness techniques and the awareness of the moment is a part of a creative work, it kind of opened a whole new dimension. And I've decided to self-publish my first book, like a proper book that was on Amazon and everything. And what was really nice there, when I published it, luckily at that time, the way of PR was quite different. So it blew up and it was quite popular. It did really well, that book. But somebody said, that's a very good book on mindfulness. Because people go like, this is nice pictures and this is this. And everything I've ever produced, I say, was always laced with mindfulness. There was always the undertone, like how to be present and think about it, have that sort of element of critical thinking of like, what is happening here? What am I doing? And have actually more enjoyment about it, because I'm sure you know yourself that sometimes it's quite easy to get a brief, head down, try to produce something. Is this good enough? Is it not good enough? And you kind of, you'd be an endless cycle of exchange, not necessarily enjoying the work, because creativity promises us to, enjoy it. Are we doing what we love? Most of us do, but is it easy? Not always, So in a long story and a noodly story is the fact that mindfulness was about like stepping out of that creative zone, stepping out of the creative sort of setting and looking at it like, how can I see it differently as a human being? And how can I actually make it work differently in a way that is actually, a situation when I'm happy to come back for more, rather than going, F this, I'd rather be a gardener or a bin man, because that's potentially an easier career.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what mindfulness means to you, because not everyone might not be familiar with that. And I guess the first thing you go to is meditation. Like, you think of it as meditation, but what's it mean to you? And you said something interesting, like you've worked it into your creative process. So it'd be cool if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between mindfulness and meditation. Meditation is a tool that you can do when you can switch off, from you try to observe your thoughts, observe mind, tune into the signals from outside and kind of see them as they come and go. So it's almost like, imagine looking at clouds. You're like, you're staring at clouds. You're only thinking about clouds because they come and go. And that's representative of our thoughts. With meditations, as I said, we often think that that's kind of like a plaster, like a real band-aid and real quick solution for, busy mind. But the problem with that is we are quite easy and quick to judge ourselves how well we are relaxing, like how well we actually, stopping that busy mind. And that becomes almost a problem within a problem. So if I keep sort of combining those two sort of analogies with the runner, is like, you might be running your first 5K and you've got that Nike app in your ear saying, hey, you just completed the first K at, 6 minutes per K. And you're like, oh, I need to be faster. I need to do better. I need to do faster. And you're like, you're not enjoying it. You're dreading that voice in your ear going, yeah, you just run the next K even slower. You're like, yeah, this is not fun, is it? So you kind of try to sort of stop and almost just like be with yourself. And staying with the sort of topic of meditation, there's a good meditation that's called body scan, if you're aware of it. If you know body scan, it's like you literally focus on taking the in breaths in your body and thinking like, okay, what do my toes feel like? What do my soles feel like? What does my heel feel like? And you are focusing on just yourself, because the problem with our busy minds is the fact that we are invent lots of false narratives, and they could be about situations. You can feel like you're in danger. There's a lots of elements that you think like, okay, I'm gonna have a panic attack. I'm gonna throw up. I'm gonna, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Like, what do people think of me? Because you are not seeing the situation for what it is. So with meditation, it's kind of, you are only like staying with the present and listening to the signals that are happening. When it comes to mindfulness, and I think the peak of mindfulness marketing has hopefully passed, because you couldn't move some 5, 6 years ago anywhere online with like, this is mindfulness coloring books for human, like for adults, and this is mindfulness, this and that, and how to live mindfully. And it's the element of actually enjoying what you're doing. So actually being actually focused, because we dream as creators, we dream about flow states, like we sort of dug out that term again of like, hey, let's achieve flow states. And like, So how well are you prepared to achieve flow state? Like, what have you done? Actually, do you know what you're doing? Have you got everything sorted? Have you got the right materials? Do you understand the brief? Have you got space to do this? Are you okay? Have you eaten enough? Have you slept? Have you done all of this stuff so you can actually focus on your creativity? And I think that's kind of part of being mindful as a creative about the fact that there's a lot of noise that's in our lives. There's a lot of expectations that we put on ourselves. We are not always prepared for them, but we're expecting magic. And I think that's the problem. So being mindful of what creative process is more like, how do I step out and see the situation for what it is and what I can do with it, and how I can sort of influence the process and the outcome in the best possible way. Because being mindful creative, it's a big chunk of work by sort of looking after things like positive habits. It also starts gradual from within us. So if I can stop catastrophizing, if I can live more in the present moment, if I actually, as opposed to being anxious about my place in the creative setup or the society, if I actually step back and listen to what's being told me, then I can make a better judgment. So when it starts with me, then I can actually be more in control of my mind. I can sort of block out the negative feelings or negative sort of influences, start thinking positively, and I potentially get to state of flow. It's in that sort of running analogy is like, how do you get your first pair of trainers? How do you look at them, smell them, okay, this day feel right. Okay, let's take them out for a walk. Or maybe I can actually run for 1 minute and then walk for a minute. And then maybe I might run for 5 minutes and then for 5K. And then I might do longer distances, but in between, I'm going to look after my nutrition. I'm going to look after my stretches, see how I can do techniques, understand better, because that's very much like creativity. Because what I used to do, I just jumped in a big pool of creativity and options and ideas. And I would be sort of aimlessly going for ages because, like, you can keep always pressing more buttons. You can always find yourself exploring more ideas. Whereas being mindful now, I work 2, 3 hours a day. That's the maximum. But I spend all the other time thinking about what I can do, like these things that you reeled off as my introduction, they can make someone feel quite inadequate. I can feel it can be sometimes quite, it's not patronizing, but it's kind of like anxiety inducing, like, okay, well, how do you do so much? Well, I do a little bit of everything every now and then, like it's not just like that. I run my coffee company for 6 hours a day. I run my design studio for 7 hours a day. Like it's very much worked out that I can focus on what I'm going to do and what I'm going to do it rather than spending 6 hours just working out what I'm going to do next.
But it sounds to me like mindfulness is kind of the frame that you use to approach the work. It's how you're thinking about it, not when you say creative process. I'm thinking of kind of, well, I do a mood board and then the next step is, brainstorm or, whatever. But it's more the mindfulness is it's almost like productivity. You're thinking about the way that you approach the work.
Yeah, in a way, it's how aware of you are of the task and the situation and how you do it. So let's say I do workshops, which is a creative strength workshop or creative resilience workshop. And it all goes down to sort of the fact that first you need to identify what stands in your way. Then you need to listen, obviously observe the situation. Then you need to listen and express yourself better and then kind of be ready for what can go wrong. So let's say when we identify, so let's say you got a creative project that you haven't done before, you got a new client. Okay, so what's standing in the way of me achieving it? Have I got the right skill set? Have I got the right tools for it? Have I got the right knowledge? Have I got the right collaborators, budget, all of that stuff? And then you can say, this feels all quite a lot. I haven't done this. And as many designers have been always guilty in the past, like you say yes to things you've never done before. And then you get overwhelmed because you realize, I don't know how the fuck I do this. I've never done this. How do I do this? So you get overwhelmed and you start panicking. So at such moments, you're like, okay, so it's actually just take it a notch down and really make a real conscious plan of like, how do we do this? Because I used to get in my real sort of the peak of the burnout, I would be picking up the phone. I would not be even breathing properly. I'd be like standing in a post office, clenching my buttocks. And I'd be like just kind of constantly like on edge. So it's like the mindfulness techniques is like about as simple as, okay, I've got a feedback session. It's not going well. What you gonna do? As opposed to answering the phone straight away, going, this is a battle. It's like taking a few deep breaths and actually making a plan, and actually being one step ahead. Because this is what I've learned about generally about work and being a human and being a parent and, being any other sorts of different sort of roles and as a grown up, try to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. Like, you no longer sort of bumble around aimlessly with no plan. You have a plan. This is the difference. You have a plan and you're prepared for the plan to go wrong. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready for this to go either well or to go to wrong, because if it goes wrong, I know what I'm doing next. And this is not like being ready for plan A or for plan B. It's just being realistic, because it's easy to think with the creative process that you got to brief and there's only one outcome that you haven't really thought about properly. So like, how do you get ready? How do you get aligned? How do you get better? So in that creative workshop, we also talk about the fact that we need to listen better. From the episode of me being so badly burnt out that I couldn't cross the road, I've been on and off with different types of coaching and therapy for the last 11, 12 years. And I still do a bit, but like kind of just trying to tune up a bit. And I remember doing some anxiety coaching just because I wanted to try it. And all I've learned after 8 weeks of doing it, that I just need to listen. I just need to listen. And it's quite hard sometimes, right? You're thinking, I'm very good at listening. Like, no, you're not. Because if you're trying to prove your worth in the room, if you're a little bit anxious, if you're feeling any sort of imposter syndrome, you will try to prove your worth. People say, hey, you're the creative one. What's your answer? Be like, I don't have one, but I'm going to give you one. You push yourself into the places where you shouldn't be, because it's okay to take a deep breath and say, wait a minute, I've been here for 5 minutes. Why are you asking me this question? I'm not an Einstein. I don't have a glass crystal to say, this is your answer. Everything is a part of the process. And I think the mindfulness techniques are about the fact that you can do a lot of things for yourself, not to panic, not to catastrophize, not to, get pushed over easily. Like, you can actually stand back and say, I can see what's going on here. And I know that I'm in no danger. Like, I'm not going to get sacked. I'm going to get paid. Everything will be fine. And it comes with a way of letting go, because in the phase that I'm describing, like the self-obsessed or the selfish phase, when you start letting go of like, you know what? I don't need all the credit on every poster or every campaign. I don't need every credit. I'm happy. I'm running a team. It's more about the good of the project. You start loosening up, and all of the sort of anxieties and sort of that sort of leadership or the wannabe leadership softens, and you can actually see that there's a lot more that we connect to as human beings with one another on that sort of nicer level, that sort of creative level, that doesn't create as many sort of anxiety inducing elements and situations. So yeah, it's that. And then after listening, there's an element of actually how do you communicate, because the reason why people get freaked out by feedback by people who don't know much about creativity is because it's the lack of vocal dexterity, the lack of eloquence, the lack of experience of like, how do you breathe back on changes? Because as a creative, I found that I need to own and enjoy my process. I can't rely on someone knowing something really well that will push the project across. Even as a midway to senior, I realized that you're working with people who don't have a clue how creativity is commissioned or how creativity should be produced, but they tell you what to do. And you feel like an idiot. Like, wait a minute. Like, I'm here, like trying to solve everything, and you're telling me I'm doing it wrong. So it's about understanding like how you get people, like what day they might be having. Did they have an argument at home, or are they stressed about the deadlines? Is their boss and manager, breathing down their neck? And the more you work on yourself, that peaceful silence is more your prevalent sort of part of your day, then everything gets easier. Actually, you can realize that the feedback's got nothing to do with me. The negative energy from somebody, it's got nothing to do with me. The work I've done that was done to the brief is done well. That someone changing the brief, it's got nothing to do with me, because it's easy to panic, especially in the younger ages, especially when you're not when you are not as experienced. You thinking that the world is burning down because you've done something wrong. It's got nothing to do with you. And that's the most liberating element of being creative and knowing all of that, because you go like, yeah, you just knock yourself out, but I know it's got nothing to do with me. I know I've done everything well.
Do you? I mean, you touched on this. You mentioned that like you did a course on kind of psychology at 17, but it didn't really interest you. Like, I'm in my 40s now, and I'm becoming much more aware of mindfulness. Do you think this is something for everyone? Like, everyone should study mindfulness. It's going to be a useful tool.
I can tell you that my kids are 5 and 8, and they do yoga 3 days a week in school. they know more about yoga than I do. Because I remember when I bought a yoga DVD when I was 25, and I showed it to my senior designer, and he was like, just don't mention it. You'll get bullied. Just don't mention that. Like this is early 2000s. It was like, don't mention you got yoga DVD. And in essence, it's the beginning. Like we don't look after our minds as well as we look after our bodies or our nutrition. Or, I mean, we spend more money on buying courses on photography or animation, or we do more sales leads and watch Chris Doe's videos, about, sales funnels and that kind of stuff. But the stuff that's closest to home for us, especially the mind, the kind of, I think because of maybe the angle that it's coming from, it's not always taken seriously. And sometimes you mention mindfulness to someone and they go like, "Oh yeah, I've heard about that," and they tell you something completely misleading about, like, that's got nothing to do with mindfulness. And yeah, I think I'm hopeful that, I've seen my kids being sort of taught and brought up with the element of emotional intelligence, more compassion, more pastoral care in their school. Just that to me is a real future, because those kids come into this world with a little bit less resilience, because we got our resilience in the school fights, in the play fights and sort of running around. Obviously, I'm a similar age of yours. So we had a different upbringing. We did all sorts of scaffolds and things with our friends. And, like we had sort of this real chunky kids upbringing, kind of free range. Whereas they've got slightly different lives. I'm not saying easier, but they got different lives. They don't have to troubleshoot too many interpersonal, problems and fights and that kind of stuff. And I think their resilience is a little bit less, but I think we're preparing them how to deal with the things that can go wrong. I think that's good. But for people who are of our age, I think it's just kind of looking back at like how you strip back all the noise and think like, how do I do what I do and how I can do it better? Because a lot of people I have spoken to in our industry, and a lot of people who have bought the book on Mindful Creative, very much found that paragraph in there which said, "Thanks for getting the book. And I'm pretty sure you got it not way too late, because you wish you had this book much, much sooner." And that's the sort of prevailing feedback from many readers. They're like, "Thank you for making this book. Thank you for being honest. And yeah, I wish I read it years and years earlier." Because we are, as creatives, most of us on average are very foolish, stubborn, because we think we know better. So, I can tell everyone how to do, how not to burn out, how not to do that. And all of us will do it, because burnout is part of the process. It's part of, like, touching the stove. Like, how do you find if something's too hot? How do you find if something's too bitter? Like, we have to go that little bit. I mean, if you care, you will go that far. If you don't care, then there might be some other elements. But I just feel like, again, that running analogy, like if you hurt yourself running, it's because you wanted to run too fast, too far, too early. And kind of like, how do you bring it down? How do you find your sort of the outer field that, how far can you go without breaking yourself? And how do you find out how you can do it maybe slower, easier, better, and for longer? Because I think the part of resilience and creative endurance is something that we don't always think about it when we start.
I wonder if there's a kind of like a sign of our times, like you mentioned at the beginning, mobile phones and this things are getting busier, and even kids have to kind of start learning at a younger age, and it's not really something that we used to do. But you mentioned the burnout. So like, I'm not sure if you were exact words, you said it was kind of inevitable or like something you have to do. Like, do you think there's a positive element to that? Like, obviously it's changed the way you worked. Was there any positivity in that?
I think what I've learned from all of this is discipline, because I started this career with no plan. It was just pure excitement, adrenaline, dopamine, all of that. That was just like, that's what I was doing it. And it's kind of like it's a bit alike to like a substance abuse. You drink because it tastes good. And then you drink because you kind of need to get a bit better because it makes you feel ill. So you drink a little, and as you realize you can't drink no more because your body's broken. And I think you find that sort of limit. Of course, some people can drink like fish all their lives, and I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but you find your balance. You find that you can only drink X amount of beers, or you can only do X amount of projects, because I think the idea of a discipline or idea of how do you look after yourself is not always, and I guess I'll use the past tense, wasn't always an idea of that people had. Like you have projects, you have to stay late, you have to work late, your maximum someone messed up, it has to be done tomorrow. Like I think the industry itself didn't have the right leadership and the philosophy of work to lead the soldiers, the designers, the creatives in the right way. And I've got experiences from advertising where, some people had to stay up till like 4 o'clock in the morning just to prove they're reworking the idea. It was a waste of everyone's time. It was absolute waste of time because the idea was there, which is someone who was going to sign it off didn't like it that day. So yeah, I think the mismanagement of energy, ideas, and creativity creates this mess. So I felt my personal burnout was because I was leading myself on that path. I didn't have the discipline. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have anything. It was just like, I've built something, it's moving forward. Let's see how long it goes. Of course, because it wasn't built properly, the wheels came off and I realized I can do something completely different in a much, much better way. And, did I get a little bit burnt out by making 2 books at one time? Of course. I mean, I could have made my team bigger. I could have invested more into getting more help. Like sometimes you will just do things within the time scale that will make you a little bit tired. Sometimes you will push yourself. Sometimes you will try to, conquer that bigger mountain. But that's how we do it. But the mindset now is that how quickly do you recover from what you do? If you can't do anything for the next 3 months, then you clearly did something wrong. The sign of a healthy relationship is like how quickly you can get back to normal after a bad argument. This is how you have to work on yourself and understanding of the process to make sure that you can go back up again. Because if you burn out and it takes you a long time to do anything again, then that means something really bad happened.
Just as a quick side question, it's like obviously sometimes like when you burn out, like you want to do something new and different. Is that where the coffee company grew out of, or is that just unrelated?
The coffee company came as a part of one of my book projects. I had a blank page, made literally faux packaging, like taken a Photoshop mock-up, put a pattern. Lux is my daughter's middle name. So I just created like a fake coffee company. Around 2018, it was all the rage, like all the packaging pages were going crazy. So it went big. And I was like, I've already been making books by then. I'm thinking, should I just create something different? Because you kind of rely on designers wanting to buy a book. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. It's like, what do people drink? Oh, there's a lot of coffee drinkers. Am I making a coffee company? Because my mindset for all of this is kind of driven by a quote by Chris Cornell from Sound, who said that if he was the best musician in the world, would the best band in the world come and beg him to play for them? That never happened. So he had to create his own dream band. And that was Soundgarden. And in my way, it was like, I didn't wait for the best branding agency to come and beg me to work for them. I created my own branding agency. I didn't want to wait for the best publishing house to give me a publishing contract. So I published my own books. And I didn't want to wait for the best coffee company in the world to come and beg me to do their packaging and their brand strategy or whatever. So I created my own because in my opinion, there's a natural use by date for creativity or for creative titles before we move on and do something different. You get people like Neville Brennan, Milton Glaser, who were like designers. I mean, Neville Brody still's here, but Milton Glaser was like designer today, right? In my opinion, my curiosity about life and creativity and possibilities kind of takes me into different sort of challenges and situations and sort of opportunities. And I didn't want to wait for anything like this to happen by, someone coming to us. So I've created a coffee company so I can actually promote mindful moments away from that sort of chugging diesel, on a deadline of like, okay, let's keep going, lads, let's get it done. Kind of be promoting more collaboration and space for emerging talent by promoting the elements of creativity. So the coffee brand is based on, moments like being procrastinator, being a bookworm, Penser stands for thinking time. And like, it's all about sort of promoting creativity and how to celebrate it. So I've kind of wanted to create what is next, like my studio is still busy and working, but I want to have something that is just sort of like anybody else, like there's lots of people running coffee companies who are, got nothing to do with creativity, but they're successful. So I'm like, surely, there must be something in it. So it's just like, how do you join those dots and how do you put it all together into something which is beautifully packaged, over designed. Of course, there's a merge, but it just comes from the mindset like this took to launch the company. It took a very long time by doing very little for a very long time. Just like I had that time to think because I could have launched it in 2019, but I didn't launch it till 2024.
The slow coffee company, yeah.
Very much so. Yeah.
Caffeine, everything has to go quick and faster. That's interesting because it kind of leads into the next question that I want to talk about, is because I think at this time, like AI is kicking off, and there's a lot of people that are a little bit nervous about AI and how it's going to affect the design industry. So you've took your design skills and applied them to a different industry, and you've got a different business, different form of earning money. But what do you think about AI at the moment?
I think I was slightly indifferent when it all came out because the wealth of being slightly older and having a solid career behind me by the time AI came out, I was doing it for 20 odd years when generative AI was properly marketed as generative AI. You don't get fooled too easy and too quickly. You know that there's a human element to creativity and a human element to be commissioned. How does it work? How does the process work? So you know quite a lot. So when it came out, and it was okay. People started panicking. I think when you're scared and when you haven't got your baseline sorted, that resilience, that expectation of like, let's actually take a moment, that deep breath, like observation of like, yeah, you know what? Instead of saying anything, I'm going to listen for a little bit. I'm going to observe what's going on. Okay. Well, yeah, I think I'll be okay, because you can only sort of do a quick audit of your work so far. And at no point did you feel like I'm going to be replaced by AI at this place. Like you might be using it for generation, you might use it as a tool, but I think that sort of uninformed mass hysteria is something that's so easily multiplied and amplified through social media that there's a lack of critical thinking, that people read a headline and they shit themselves straight away because they read a headline and the headline is something that's just been designed to make them feel anxious. Then they read the subline and go like, maybe that's not as bad. And then they read the article and go like, I will be fine, right? But lots of people just stay with the headline and go like, yeah, this is going to be bad. This is going to be bad. I'm going to be replaced by AI. Thinking, in what way will it be replaced by AI? So my initial stance on this was like, whatever. And now I personally use AI to lots of my advantage, like especially the editing tools like Claude, ChatGPT, trying to use as many automations as I can to find a way how to be able to run all of those different businesses without those businesses running my day. Because if you don't prepare yourself for a day, then the day will run away with you. Like someone will take control of your day. So it goes back to the plan and the discipline about how you structure your day and how you structure your work. So you've got those pockets of time to think about stuff. So as a tool, it's done some interesting things, but even after now, 2+ of generative AI, you see stuff like Sora, some of the mid-journey stuff is great, but it does look like it was created by AI. Like you've never seen anything go like, is this AI? No, not. Like you always see an AI go like, yep, definitely. Like someone created it, and especially someone who doesn't have a creative eye created an image, and they're celebrating, they're clapping, they're thinking this is great. You look at it like, yeah, for someone who's been creating images for 20 years, you spot the imperfection straight away. You spot the composition and how it fills the space. It's a good tool. I think, for example, what AI the way it has been implemented, let's say in Photoshop. So I'm part graphic designer, part retoucher, and things that I used to know as a retoucher, how to extend backgrounds and how to do certain things. That's a click of a button. Content aware fill, generative fill, and it works. It's actually, it saves me so much. It saves me so much time because you know what to look for and how to do it. So again, as an athlete, one day when you can't run as fast as every other people, you become a coach because you've known how to do the thing properly and how to advise other people. So we haven't really made that much progress with generative AI in the last couple of years. It's come up, it looks okay. There's some little bits and bobs, but it hasn't revolutionarily changed everything the way that we were sort of being led to be scared by the media or some voices of those who were less informed and definitely a lot more scared.
Yeah, I was the complete opposite. It kind of terrifies me. I started like I should probably practice more mindfulness and live in the moment, but like my mind goes to the future. And it's like as someone like I do more motion design, so it's like the video side of it is kind of constantly improving. And I think at one point we'll get to a point where you can just simulate the 3D world. Like, and then what's a video? Like a video is just a kind of a representation of a 3-year world. I think it will change things, but it might be in like 5 to 10 years. Like,
Yeah, I think the problem that you've got with AI, well, generally there's a problem with AI is the copyright usage. So on my podcast, I've spoken to Chris and Nikki from Jelly, our production house in London, and they say that so many ad agencies and brands literally have a clause that no AI can be used in the work because you can be sued if someone supports the piece of their work in it. You got heaps of trouble. So yeah, I think from my perspective, and having, for example, conversation with someone like Ben Talon about AI scraping data and scraping our work and training the models and all of this and stuff. We think like we want to have a say in all of this. Like, is AI okay to be using my imagery or using my IP? And of course, it already happened. Like before we even had a say. Like it's been scraping our websites. If you look at our website analytics, you will find that you go like 1 million page views from Claude or like 600,000 views from. It's happening, and you can't say no to it because we've chosen to be on the internet, and therefore that information is there. But then, when you look at how we've learned what we do, we looked at other people's. No, we've been training our models on other people's work. We've been learning through pattern recognition how this work is done, and we've been copying people for the first few years of our careers, willingly, knowingly. But when it's happening to us by a machine that's got no face, we go like, "Oh shit, what's happening now?" So I'm not saying that we should be sort of more reckless and just be more or less protective about our work, but if it goes out there, it's going to be seen someone, and if it's part of creating something for the future, is the motion going to be as good as it can be in 10 years' time? I mean, it's always going to be trained on something that, unless it's trained on someone's work, you're always going to be infringing someone's copyright. And unless we totally, give up copyright, I don't think we will. Yeah, it's like, how do you outdo it? How do you overcome it? Because, when photography came along, all the portrait artists were like, what are we going to do next? We're going to reinvent ourselves. Are we going to do this differently? Like, there's always another pocket, another time saving in a way of like, okay, this has been done. Where do we go next? I think it's an opportunity. It might be scary because it's already unknown. And just like my unlimited hours of time that I used to work myself to the ground, it's just like it's unregulated. We don't know what shapes it's got. We don't know how what it's capable of. So I just feel like, what? Take a deep breath. Look at what it is. Look at your client list. Look how much time you've got left. And in your work, you're like, what? We'll be fine. Absolutely fine.
yeah, I think your approach to it is kind of based in mindfulness as well. It's like the idea that you don't look too far into the future and you accept that you have the confidence and abilities to adapt to whatever is presented to yourself in the future.
I think the mantra is that you can control what you can and let go of what you can't. You can't control AI and what it does and who's creating it, but you can control your work and, see if you can use it as a tool, like is it as an aid to your work. But yeah, I mean, you can't, this is the thing. Like now after hitting a rock bottom, I have defined my enough. I don't care for likes. I don't care for views. I don't care for play, no, for downloads, whatever. It's nice that when things happen, it's nice to be selling books when they're selling. But, there's always going to be a peak. And there's always going to be a low. It's going to be high and low. And you kind of have to be ready for all of it. Some of it's coming inevitably, sooner or later. So is that kind of, I mean, it's a half full view of life, like something else is coming. And I think in a way of, especially for the last 8 years publishing books, every single year was different in some way. Like what worked in 2016 didn't work in 2017. Social media changed the way people used to use it, how people used to promote stuff, how they know, like everything changes. And you can be sort of sat there going, well, that's a bit unfair. Like I've just done all of this work and everything changed. The algorithm changed, the usage changed, the people have changed. You're like, well, actually, that's a good opportunity to actually change what I'm doing. And I've like, this is the mindset why, I've created a coffee company, why I'm starting my own podcast, why I'm sort of writing my 7th book, because it all changes. We haven't completed anything. Like we get to learn more about ourselves. We get to learn more about how we do stuff. I think by encouraging better collaboration. We can actually be less anxious about what we're creating and be less stressed about it and actually enjoy it for once. Because when I look back at that blizzard of work that, got me so much in trouble with, physically and mentally, I can see some pieces sometimes because luckily I printed them in form of like a little booklets. So I know that what the work looked like, what I did. I've got some reminder on paper because I looked back and it was 10 years of work, maybe let's say 15 years of hours. And I was like, what did I do? I didn't have a clue. I didn't particularly wasn't particularly mindful about what I was doing because it was next, 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 next. And it's like imagine being on Pinterest, clicking the next button or doing something like this is how the career felt back then. And you're like, surely there must be more to actually have to not to actually have in your hand to show for that year, for those years, because it goes really quickly. So when we all sort of turn up the noise to 11 on everything that we do, it all gets noisier, more complicated, more anxious. And you want to look back and say, well, I could have done half of it and I could have enjoyed it because I could have done half of it and I could have enjoyed it more.
Fantastic. It's been great speaking to you. And I think that's a good message to kind of end on, that like we should be more aware of what we're doing at present and enjoy the work that we're doing right now.
I agree with that.
Cool. So if someone's interested in reading your book and learning more about that, like where can they find it? Where should they go?
I think they can type in the word Radim into Google, and I think I come up as a second, what you call it, result. Come to my personal website, radimmalinic.co.uk, and you can get information on my books. You can download samples of my books. They'll come straight to your inbox. You can watch a talk that I've got on there, and just, kind of click through some of the stuff. After you finish listening to this podcast, maybe you can check out Mindful Creative, which is my way of shining light on some of the celebrated people in the industry and getting them to open up and talk about exactly this stuff, like how we are all equal in creativity in life, how everyone struggles the same, breaks the same, cries the same, struggles the same, because I think we've created this industry that makes it look like that when you make it to the top, life gets easy, but it doesn't. It just gets different.
Fantastic. So I really appreciate your time and chatting to us today. So thanks for that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.